Hello, and welcome to another edition of F&R Ask the Expert. Today, we're going to be talking about prescribed fire and how you can use this technique to manage your fields and woodlands. We're joined today by Jared Brook, who is a Purdue Extension Wildlife Specialist, and Dr. Mike Saunders, who is an Associate Professor of Ecology and Natural Resources here at Purdue F&R. Just a reminder, if you're watching us on Facebook and we're live, you can put your questions in the comments section and Jared and Mike will answer them as time allows today. And if you have some we don't get to, we'll get you some answers after the fact. So I guess, Jared, get us started. What exactly is prescribed fire?
Yeah, so all prescribed fire is it's the planned and controlled use of fire as a management tool. And there's lots of different reasons why we might want to use fire in a lot of different areas around Indiana to help manage plant communities or manage wildlife species and reduce fuel and all that kind of stuff, which we'll probably get into. But it's just the planned and controlled use of fire. The word prescription comes in just like you would have a prescription from a doctor to treat some sort of illness. They're going to give you a prescription that's going to tell you how often to take it, that medicine, how frequently, how many times a day, and what dosage. Prescription comes into play with prescribed fire and the fact that we're using fire in a very certain type of way to achieve our management goals, whatever those are. And we're also have some sort of prescription on the conditions in which we're burning in, whether it's temperature and wind and humidity, to make sure that we can maintain that fire as a controlled fire and not let it escape. So it's just the controlled application of fire on the landscape.
And this may seem like a simple question, but why should I consider prescribed fire? Why should I burn my land?
Yeah, there's lots of different reasons you should consider prescribed fire on your property. And some people may think it's counterintuitive that we're going to burn the woods or burn a field in order to enhance it for wildlife or for forest reasons, forest health, or anything like that. But we're really kind of using fire as a way to get back to some of those kind of disturbances that would have shaped our landscape and our ecosystems in the past. So as long as there's been enough oxygen in the atmosphere to start a fire, fire's been on the landscape. And as long as there's been humans in North America, they've been using fire to manage our landscape. Native Americans use fire for a variety of different reasons, to manage areas around their settlements, to help promote certain plants for wildlife species, to help them collect certain food resources and manage for certain food resources like berries or acorns. In fact, if you look back in some of the historical texts about Native American cultures and communities, one paper in particular said there was over 70 reasons why Native Americans burned the woodlands and the fields and things. So a long history of using fire, and through those thousands of years of using fire, we have a lot of plant species that are adapted and need fire in order to grow and be promoted. One really cool one that we have here in Indiana, it's up around the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, and then farther north into Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, is called a jack pine. And jack pines have what's called a serotinous cone, meaning those cones have to be heated to a certain temperature in order for them to open up, in order to drop seed and then germinate. So it's very closely tied to fire. So what we're using fire for is to kind of mimic some of those natural plant processes that occur on the landscape. From a more practical standpoint, from a landowner, you can encourage certain plant species and discourage other plant species using fire. You can create and enhance habitat for a variety of wildlife species using fire. You can reduce the amount of fuel in an area using fire. So lots of different practical applications of fire on the landscape.
So Mike, Jared talked a little bit about plants and wildlife and things like that. Can you walk us through how is setting a fire in the woods for this purpose different from, grass fires or things like that? Should I be concerned about those type of things as I look to consider this technique?
Thanks for the question. In the woods, when we're using fire, we typically have there's two major reasons that we'll use them maybe in Indiana, and that would be promoting some type of fuel reduction. And we see that done out west as well, as you use fire actually to reduce the chances of wildfire, uncontrolled fire. But in Indiana here, we also use it for changing the forest composition. So our use of fire typically is much more of a surface type of fire, where it just creeps along the surface at a slow rate. And we do those type of fires in the fall and the spring, typically. What we're just trying to do is essentially burn off understory trees, small understory trees. We're trying to kill some of the regeneration. We're trying to influence the composition of the floral community, and shift that community, shift the composition more towards fire tolerant species. Our favorite ones that we always highlight here in Indiana are oak trees and hickory trees. Those are the two species groups we're really trying to favor with fire. And so when we're doing a fire in the forest, flame lengths are pretty low. I mean, we're talking 2-3 feet is usually our targets. Sometimes we'll get a little bit hotter than that. And it moves relatively slowly through the woods. I actually have a few pictures I can show. Give me 1 second to bring them up. So here's a typical woodland fire picture. And this is actually, so these flame lengths, they might look like they're pretty tall, but they're not. You literally could walk over the top of these. They're probably 6 inches to 1 foot. Here. And I'm pulling this from an old presentation. And this was done in southern Indiana to favor oak regeneration in these forests. So
I think one of the questions that most people would have is, so these are what we would call a controlled burn. So correct. We are not in any way encouraging people to go out and start a fire in their own woodlands or in their own field. These are done by professionals.
Correct. We use very narrow prescriptions, meaning there's a very narrow window where we think conditions are right to actually achieve the goals that we want in terms of killing understory trees and reducing some of the ground flora, but not damage the overstory timber. So we are really careful that we're got the right type of humidity levels. We have the fuels, the leaves and the litter on the ground are not too wet, but not too dry. We're trying to make sure that we don't have really high winds. If we have really high winds, then this fire could get out of control. We're trying to make sure that when we burn, and you have to be really cognizant of this, I don't want all the smoke blowing onto my neighbor's property. I don't want the smoke blowing across an interstate and creating a safety hazard. So we have to take all of these factors into considerations to find these narrow windows of time during the year that we can burn safely and effectively to achieve our goals.
And Wendy, to your point about having professionals conduct these fires, it's certainly advisable from a landowner standpoint. If you have the ability to hire a professional, absolutely do that. But landowners can also use prescribed fire on their own property, but it's always advised to have the proper training and experience before you light a fire. Whether that's going through some of the courses, there's an online course through E-Extension that's really good, that provides a good background information about prescribed fire. Attending a field day or workshop, or going through actual wildland firefighter training, those are all good options. Or even helping out other landowners that have experience to get you experience. But the thing we want to make sure is that, again, these are prescribed fires, they're controlled burns. So having the experience and having the training is necessary if you as a landowner want to conduct your own fire. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, and a lot of landowners don't, and there's nothing wrong with that, through the Indiana Prescribed Fire Council on the website, inpfc.org, we have come up with a list of private consultants that offer prescribed fire as a service. So if you think prescribed fire is right for your property, for whatever your management objectives are, but don't feel like you have the experience and training necessary to use fire, then you can contact one of these consultants and they may be able to help you on your property. Sorry, we can't hear you. Sounds like the water's running. All right, so looks like we're still live. Wendy may be jumping off here. So, Mike, what are some common questions you get about prescribed fire from landowners?
Well, one of the most frequent I'll get is, does the fire actually damage all my trees? Does it damage the timber values of my trees? And we've done there's a lot of fear in using fire in the woods in particular because of that. And so a few years ago, we actually did some research and actually went down to southern Indiana and looked at, well, throughout the central hardwood region, throughout Indiana and the neighboring states, and documented the damage that prescribed fire that the U.S. Forest Service was doing on their lands, documented how much damage was resulting from that fire from the use of prescribed fire and repeated use of prescribed fire, burning these stands up to 6 to 8 times. And it was over 200 stands. And after doing the analysis, we actually found that prescribed fire had a very insignificant effect on stand values, on projected timber values of those stands. But prescribed fire, so it didn't have no effect. There was some reduction, particularly when you had 3 or more burns. But that was offset by a lot more oak regeneration, the species we're trying to regenerate when we're doing these fires in a lot of our forests. So while you would take some financial hit from slight damage to overstory trees, you were saving a lot of money by not having to do a lot of planting and regeneration treatments in getting oak back into your forest.
So burning up your timber value is certainly a question that I hear a lot from landowners that don't want to burn in the woods. The other one I get too is if I use the fire in my woods, aren't I going to burn up all my acorns?
We actually did some research on that as well. There's no doubt that when you do a fire in the fall after acorn drop, you're going to kill a lot of those acorns on the surface.
But to that point, it doesn't mean that the wildlife aren't going to eat them. So
yeah, it doesn't mean the wildlife aren't going to eat it. And from a regeneration standpoint, most of the acorns on the surface of the ground never really turn into trees. We've actually done a lot of research looking at the effects of, there's a mediator here, and it's rodents. Rodents actually scatter hoarding, like squirrels, chipmunks, actually going out and planting these acorns in their scatter hoards over the winter for food. Well, they forget about those. And a lot of the regeneration, a lot of the trees we see in a stand are result from chipmunks and squirrels forgetting where they put their food.
So
All
we need
right.
squirrels with bad memories.
Yeah. So when we burn, we actually, those things are already underground and been planted. And a vast majority of the trees we see are resulting from that. And by burning, we actually increase the probability that those cached acorns that have been planted actually germinate, because we get rid of a lot of the ground layer, we get rid of the competition, so the growing conditions are better for those seedlings.
So you may burn up some acorns on the surface, but you're not impacting the ones that are buried by squirrels, which are the ones that are going to germinate anyway.
Yep,
and then
correct.
Even though you're burning the acorns, it doesn't mean that a deer or turkey or whatever is not going to eat them.
No, they still eat them. We still find burned acorns in some of the larger hoarders. Like some of the mice will still eat them.
All right, am I back? Can you hear me?
You are back.
You're back.
Yay!
Our fearless leader is back.
You guys did great without me, I know. So one of the questions that a lot of people might have is, you talked about wildlife scattering, the acorns and things like that, but are there any things that we should be doing to make sure we're not harming any wildlife while we're setting up for a prescribed burn?
Yeah, so inevitably with the prescribed fire, there's always the chance that you're going to injure or kill, an individual of a certain wildlife species. But generally, by using fire to create better habitat for a species, you're generally doing more positive than you are doing negative. And there's certain ways that we can change how we use fire versus, what time of year we use it, what kind of techniques we use, how fast we burn, how slow we burn. That can help kind of mitigate those, what we call direct impacts or injury or killing wildlife. So for example, one big one that people worry about is box turtles. As you know, turtles are slow. They're not going to move a lot. However, pretty neat. Turtles have a pretty keen sense of getting away from fire. Even though they may not move very fast, they can burrow and they can find shelter under logs and near wet areas as well. However, there's always the chance that you could injure one. So the way that we mitigate burning and injuring box turtles is we burn earlier in the year before they've emerged from their hibernation. So they're going to be under the soil, buried, and they've buried themselves pretty deep. And we can light a surface fire in a field or in a woodland in February or March, and those things are going to still be buried. They're not going to emerge until sometime in March and April, so we can burn earlier to try to not injure box turtles.
To that point,
sorry, Mike.
To that point, one of the things that a lot of individuals don't understand is that the temperatures from a fire, most of the heat that we see from the fire is right at the ground surface and above. It only takes getting under the surface an inch or two, and you're actually into a zone where a fire can go right over the top of you and you don't even know the difference. The soil is a really big insulator. So all of these small animals, small mammals, these turtles, when they can just bury themselves in the ground a couple inches, they're pretty much safe from the fire.
If you have wings, you can fly away, right? That's the easiest way to get away. If you have legs, hopefully you can run away. If you're a slithering creature like a snake, you slither away and you find somewhere, maybe a burrow or something to get into, or an unburned area. And there's lots of times that we're burning in the late summer in a field in July or August, and we see snakes and all kinds of stuff slither across the fire breaks, and they're making their way out. They have a pretty good keen sense of being able to know what's going on. Certainly there's probably some that can't move fast enough to get out, but by creating better habitat, we're helping the population overall. And another way that we mitigate some of those direct effects to wildlife is we burn in patches and we burn smaller units. So if we have a 40-acre field, we're not going to burn the whole 40 acres at one time. What we're going to do is we're going to break that up into 3 to 5 acre patches, and maybe we burn 2 this year and 2 next year and 2 the year after. So we're creating some diversity on the landscape, and we're creating some refuge areas for those animals to seek out.
And giving Jared a shout out here, he has a series called Wildlife Habitat Hints, and he talks a lot about, you know, prepping your land for wildlife and whether that's food plots and things like that. Another series he's gone into recently, which is part of the impetus for today's Ask the Expert, is a series on different techniques for prescribed fire. So Jared, I know people can go watch the videos, and I'll certainly put those links in the comment section, but as you guys look at different techniques, is there different equipment people need? Are there different techniques they should use for different, situations, etc.? If you guys can both kind of cover that. Jared, if you want to talk first about fields, since that's what you were most recently talking about, and then Mike, if you want to talk about how you guys do that in the forest.
Yeah, so when it comes to equipment for burning, there's certain things you need from a protective standpoint, so what we call PPE or personal protective equipment. And then there's certain equipment that you need to light the fire and certain equipment you need to help suppress or put out the fire. So from a personal protective equipment standpoint, the best case scenario if you're going to be burning is that you have fire retardant clothing, and it's often sold as Nomex, and you see all the people out fighting wildfires or setting prescribed fires, and they're wearing those yellow shirts and green pants. That's fire retardant clothing. That's Nomex. So that's the best thing that you can have to burn in. Now, it still can be safe to burn if you're a landowner and you don't have the money or the means to buy $300 or $400 pair of pants and shirts. The next best thing is that you wear all natural fibers, and that means you're wearing leather boots, you're wearing jeans that are made of all cotton or denim, and you're wearing a shirt that's all cotton or all wool. You don't want any synthetic fibers because the synthetic fibers will melt so they may melt to your skin if something happens. So you want to wear all cotton or all wool, all natural fibers. And of course you want to wear leather gloves, some sort of hard hat or hat, eye protection, and then I usually have a bandana or handkerchief. And now with everyone carrying around masks these days, you have a nice mask with you that you can cover your face with so you're not inhaling smoke the entire time. So those are the kind of scenarios from a personal protective equipment standpoint. When you're actually going to light the fire, the best way to light the fire, the easiest way, is with what's called a drip torch. And that's just a canister with a little wick on the end, and it drips fuel out, and then it lights the fire. There's other ways to do it. That's probably the simplest and easiest way. You can get a drip torch for about $100. Not going to be too cost prohibitive. From a suppression or actually helping to control the fire, the best things you're going to have are some sort of ATV or UTV that has water on it, so a sprayer on the back of it. If you're burning fields, having flappers or rakes and sort of fire tools that you can use to put out the fire if it gets to where you don't want it to be. Those are all good pieces of equipment. You want to make sure you have radios or some way to contact people that are helping burn with you. That way you can communicate easily and tell people what's going on. So those are some just basic equipment things, and there's more that we can get into, and there's some good resources from Iowa State Extension that talks about different resources or different pieces of equipment that you should have on hand if you're going to be burning.
Mike, is that any different from what you guys do out in the woodlands?
Not really. I mean, the techniques that we use in the woods are the same. There's a couple different firing techniques we might differ a little bit on, but we're using the same types of PPE. Sometimes the issue that we have is we will not have access to get to a site with UTV in the woods because it's too steep or there's trees in the way. So a lot of times we want to have water there, but sometimes we can't rely on a lot of water. Or we have to carry the water on our backs. So we actually have bladders that'll hold several gallons of water so that we can help kind of watch the fire lines and the fuel breaks to make sure we have no slop overs. One of the other major differences is in some respect moves a little bit more than it does in a grassland. When we're doing a fire in the fall, for example, and we have, the leaves are coming down and they're fresh. If you have any kind of wind, it can easily blow burning leaves across the fire line. So you have to watch that very closely in the wooded area. It can happen in the grassland area as well, but we see it a lot in the woodlands, particularly if we have a lot of slope that kind of funnels winds. I think the other thing in a wooded area that we have to be a lot more cognizant of is after the fire. When we do the fire in a grassland in a field, it's pretty apparent when the fire's out. In the woods, that's not always the case. You'll run a fire and then all of a sudden you'll start a dead tree on fire, and that dead tree might smoke a little bit, but you might not know it very well, and it throws embers after you leave the fire. So you have to be a lot more careful and look a lot more closely to find hot pockets and dead trees on dead logs. Make sure they're out before you leave the fire. Otherwise, you could wake up the next morning and your neighbor's woodlands are on fire. So there's a lot more potential for some liability issues there.
Yeah, so Mike brought up some good points about being safe and conducting fires safely. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to take away is just how to be safe and how to use prescribed fire correctly. And inside of correctly means that you do it safely so that it stays within the burn unit. And actually, we wrote a blog post not too long ago, or actually about a year ago, and it's called 6 Things to Consider Before You Ignite a Fire. And so some of the things that you want to ensure to make sure that you are conducting fires safely is obviously first and foremost is you want to have experience, you want to have training. And we talked a lot about that to begin with. The next thing is that you want to have a burn plan. And a burn plan is just a document that outlines everything that you need to know about the burn that's going to go on. And so that's going to have your weather prescriptions. So it's going to tell you exactly what weather conditions you are looking for to burn in when the humidity's right. It's not too high where you can't get it to burn, and it's not too low to where you can't get it to stop burning. It's going to tell you your wind speed and all that kind of stuff. It's going to tell you exactly what equipment you need to have on site. It's going to tell you who you need to have with you, who you need to contact before you burn, what permits you may need. In Indiana, a lot of times you're going to need a permit from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management to do a burn, so that'll be in there. It's going to tell you exactly how you're going to go through the process of burning the unit. It's going to go through emergency contacts, again, who you should contact before the burn, maybe your local fire department, your county sheriff's dispatch to let them know that you're burning so that they can, if they receive calls about a fire, that they know that it's a prescribed fire and they don't have to send the cavalry out to help unless you call them. So it's going to tell you all that kind of information in there. And if you're serious about considering burning and you're looking at getting a burn plan, you can reach out to a private consultant. They can help you write a burn plan. Your district wildlife biologist, if you reach out to them, they can help you with burn plans. And you can find that contact information on our pond and wildlife management website. We have a tool called Find Your County Contact that gives you information about foresters and biologists in your county and everything. So you might want to make sure you have a burn plan. The other big thing when it comes to using prescribed fire safely, and one of the probably the biggest mistake that I see people make when using fire is not having good fire breaks. And the question I always get from people is, how do you actually stop the fire from getting into an area you don't want to burn? Well, that's with fire breaks. Just like it sounds, a fire break is a way to stop the fire. The best fire breaks that you can have are obviously going to be some sort of water, whether it's going to be like a creek, a river, a pond, or something like that. And then beyond that, you want to have bare mineral soil is probably the next best one. In a field, that means that you're probably going to be disking or rototilling the soil. so that when the fire hits the soil, it stops dead right there. And that generally you're going to want a fire break width about 3 to 4 times the height of the vegetation you're burning. So if you're burning 5-foot tall native grasses, you're going to want a fire break that's at least 15 to 20 feet tall and 15 to 20 feet wide in most cases. When you get in the woods, like Mike said, you get a lot lower flame lengths, a lot shorter. So they're going to be 6 inches to a foot, maybe 2 feet. And in that case, you're going to want a fire break that's maybe 3 to 5, maybe 6 feet wide. And the best way to create fire breaks in the woods is as easy as using a leaf blower, blowing all those leaves back into the unit, and then getting down to bare mineral soil. And it's relatively easy to put in fire breaks in the woods. But not putting good fire breaks in is probably one of the biggest causes of fires getting out where they're not supposed to when it comes to prescribed fire, especially here in Indiana. The 2 biggest factors being, bad fire breaks and then burning under the wrong weather conditions. Those are probably the 2 biggest factors. So those are a few things to help keep you safe. And you can read more about how to conduct fire safely in that blog.
A lot of great information there, Jared, and those links are all in the comment section here on Facebook. Just a reminder, if you have a question, I know we've covered a lot of ground about prescribed fire. If you have a question, put that in the comments on Facebook, and these guys will answer them for you. I guess the next question, logical question, you talked a lot about, we burn in the summer, we burn in the fall, we burn in the spring. Is there a method to your madness besides the weather, obviously the weather being number one? What time of year should I burn? Does it matter what type of property I'm burning? Do I burn my field or something to prep for woodlands or wildlife at different times? Jared, start me through the fields, and then Mike, jump me to the forest.
Yeah, so when you're deciding the 2 kind of main factors that dictate kind of what you get back in your field after you burn are probably how frequently you burn. So how many years between burns, and then what time of year you burn. So that's what we call seasonality. And you burn in different seasons for different reasons. Say if the traditional time period that people like to burn fields is in the spring, in that kind of February to April time frame, and burning that time of year can be beneficial. It really helps reduce the amount of dead material that's on the ground. So the litter and the thatch, which can be important because that kind of gets in the way of plants germinating and wildlife moving efficiently through the field. You can increase grass density and grass cover, especially native grass cover that time of year. So if you're burning a field and you're putting cattle on it to graze it, that can be a really good way to do it. Or if you're interested in grassland songbirds like Henslow sparrows, that can be a really good way to help increase grass density. It can also be a good way to top kill woody plants in the field. So if you have a field that's the woody plants are getting too tall, there's too much woody stuff, you can use a fire in that dormant season, really anytime from about December to early April, to kind of top kill those woody plants and reduce their height. The other time of year that you're starting to see more people burn for different reasons is what we call the late growing season, which is typically that August to October time frame when things are still green and they haven't gone dormant yet. And I get a lot of questions about, or people comment and say, there's no way you can get that to burn. It's way too green. It won't burn. Well, it will burn under the right conditions. And there's reasons we may want to burn it that time of year, especially from a native grass field or a prairie. And one of those reasons would be increasing wildflowers or forbs. So there's been some research to show that burning that time of year can help you actually increase the amount of wildflowers or forbs that you may have in that field. Another reason is if we want to reduce the amount of woody encroachment or woody cover in the field, burning that late growing season does a much better job at actually killing and reducing woody cover for a couple of reasons. One being it's already 80, 90 degrees out, so you don't have to heat up those woody stems as much for as long to actually get them to top kill. And then you're also hitting those plants at a very weak time in their in their life stages. So they've expended most of their resources that July, August timeframe, and they haven't really pulled them back down to the roots. So you can really control a lot of woody plants that time of year. From a season standpoint, the best thing to think about is that you don't want to burn the same field in the same season repeatedly over several years or decades. You kind of want to vary those timings. So maybe you burn it one time in the spring, and then maybe 2 or 3 years later down the road you burn it in the fall, and kind of alternate those around.
Mike, you want to jump in and talk about burning in your woods?
Sure. The woods were a little bit more restricted. Basically, my rule is I burn when I can, because our burning windows in the woods, the times that we actually get the right conditions to have a fire do what we want, are a lot narrower. And we typically get 2 windows. We get a window in the spring. Southern Indiana, that might start early February. Northern Indiana, it's probably going to be more like early March. And it'll extend until stuff really starts to green up, which is typically April 1st to April 15th. We get another window in the fall, and that's in the best condition is like right after leaf drop, where we get fuel on the ground. That's typically a couple weeks, like the end of November or end of October through, sometimes we can burn clear till the 1st of December, but most of the time we're done by Thanksgiving. Those are the times we actually have enough available fuel on the ground to really carry a fire. We don't have the fuel loads like you have in a prairie, of all these fine fuels that can really, or in a grassland that has a lot of fine fuels that burn readily in a lot of conditions. Our fuels are a little heavier, so it takes the right conditions to be able to dry it out. And the leaves are the fine fuels, so we have to have a lot of leaves on the ground to really carry a fire. So a lot of our fires are really dormant season fires. Beyond the growing season, we would love. I mean, I'd love to run growing season fires, but a lot of times the conditions when you could actually run a fire in the woods during the growing season, those are conditions that are really unsafe to try to do a fire, and very likely to catch a neighbor's house on, or not house, but field on fire or whatnot. It's that like that summer drought. You don't want to run a fire in the middle of a drought. The fuels it's just too dangerous and too hard to control. So that's where we do a lot of our burning. Sometimes we can kind of get a little bit into the growing season in the spring, like in April and May, in certain forest types. That can be really powerful to killing some of our like our maples, our beech, our maples, our tulip poplar, because they've started to grow a lot earlier in the growing season than our oaks. Sometimes we can get those conditions and we'll try to run a fire there, and they're really effective. But we don't get those years very often where we can actually run a fire.
So Mike hit on weather conditions a little bit, and really to use fire safely and effectively, you kind of have to be an amateur meteorologist, and that's where the training and experience comes into play, because you learn what conditions are good and what conditions are bad, which conditions are going to be dangerous to burn in, and then which conditions are going to be too wet to burn. We're generally in Indiana on the side of it's too wet to burn. Yeah. But you have to be able to look at things like relative humidity and temperature and wind speed and direction and fuel moisture and all those kind of things to be able to kind of identify what are that sweet spot of favorable conditions. And so it's important, and that's where training comes in. You can't learn that stuff without training and without experience.
Jared, that's where that burn plan you talked about comes in handy, because you know what your exit strategy is if things And that's another thing I wanted to bring up is, and you talked about letting the fire department know. I know they appreciate that, so they don't get calls. I know when Prophetstown State Park was doing a prescribed burn a few weeks ago, you could see it far, far away because the thick black smoke. And so I guess you have an exit strategy always. You know, if the weather changes or the wind direction changes, that's when that burn plan really comes in, because you want to have somebody ready. Is that
That's right.
right?
And so that, yep. So when in your burn plan, you're going to have a weather prescription. It's going to tell you it's favorable to burn under these conditions, and it's going to give you kind of a window. So it's going to give you, like, let's take relative humidity for example. It's going to tell you what is the lowest relative humidity that you can burn at, and what is the highest relative humidity that you can burn at. And those are going to be based on a lot of things. They're going to be based on, you know, how the fire is going to behave, how fast it's going to move, and how slow it's going to move. And then also it's going to be based a lot on your experience, the site conditions, how much equipment and how many people you have to help you. And so if it's outside of that window, then we don't burn. Like if it's, say our bottom for our relative humidity is 40% and it's 38, then we're not going to burn, just because we know what we can handle and what we can control. And once we start breaking those prescriptions, that's when bad things can start to happen.
Mike, I guess this is the $1 million question, is surely you've been in bad burns, both of you, I'm sure. What are some of those ways we've talked about that people can, if they're thinking about burning, what ways can they prevent those things? And then B, what did you do in those situations? Because I know we learn sometimes the most. Jared talks about this all the time with food plots and things like that. You learn sometimes more from your failures. So what are some of those lessons we can pass along to our friends here in Indiana that are maybe considering prescribed burns?
Well, I haven't been on a ton of bad burns. I've had really good collaborators like Jared that have really know a lot more, have a lot more experience with fire than even I do. So we've had pretty good prescriptions and plans in place. I think times when we've had, it's when our weather conditions are projected to rapidly change. So, and we try to squeeze a burn in, like when a front is coming through, like a weather front's coming through, and we see humidity is either going up very, very quickly or coming down very quickly. So it can basically mean the fire either doesn't do what we want it to do when the humidity goes up really fast. The flames just all of a sudden die and we can't get anything to burn, or the opposite, where we think we have the fire under control and it's behaving well, but the humidity just dropped, so we're out of prescription, outside of this burn plan window, and things start burning way too hot, way too fast, and we can actually get damage, like for the overstory on some of the overstory trees. So it's just, again, it's getting back to this being able to read the weather and understanding those risks when you actually put the flame on the ground. I think the second lesson I would have to say, particularly in a woodland area, walk your woods carefully when you're done and make sure it's out. We actually had a fire in southern Indiana at one of our research sites that we did not know this one stump was still burning. And over the night, that stump actually threw sparks and it caught some leaves across the fire line. So it actually started another fire, and we ended up burning. It didn't cause any damage, but we caused another 20 acres we did not plan on burning to burn overnight. It just creeped along the ground and killed some of the vegetation. We got it under control the next day. Actually, it was probably a benefit in the long term. But making sure the fire is out when you leave, that's a big, big thing to do.
Yeah, so Mike hit it on the weather conditions. There's kind of three things that are kind of commonalities in the close calls that I've had and bad burns that I've been on. The one is changing weather conditions. So the weather changes in a way that you don't expect. That can always be, a thing that kind of throws you. The other thing, and I kind of talked about earlier, is bad fire breaks. Almost, I can think of certain examples to where the fire almost got out into somewhere I didn't. And it was a result of we had bad fire breaks. They either weren't wide enough, they weren't down to bare mineral soil, or something was wrong with them that we should have caught before we started burning, or we should have been making them wider and that kind of stuff. And that's really a big one that I see a lot, is that fire break aspect. So that's a one really to consider. And then the third one is just not following your burn plan. So the more you can follow your burn plan, because you should have thought about a lot of those things in your burn plan. And so again, getting outside the prescription, not having enough equipment or people on site and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would reinforce the not enough people, not having enough eyes on your burn lines. That's a common mistake, I think, when you first start trying to do prescribed fires. You need to have people watching your burn lines to make sure that you don't have an escape. And that only comes with experience in knowing how many people you need for the certain terrain, the certain type of fire. Having that laid on your burn plan, and don't shortchange the number of eyes that you need to watch that fire.
Certainly personnel is huge, and training as well. To wrap up here, guys, we've talked about a lot. There's a lot of great resources here in the comment section. Any other resources you want to pass along? First of all, we'll give a shout out to Jared for a new podcast that he's doing called Habitat University. You can find that anywhere you find your podcasts. You can also, there's one on there called Fire University that I'm assuming Jared is dealing with just this topic. And also you can go to the Natural Resources University podcast, which covers a lot of those. So you can find all of those links on our Facebook page, and I'll also post those again. But any other, I know, Jared, you do some work with the Indiana Prescribed Fire Council, some of those, any other resources you guys want to pass along, or partners that you've dealt with that can help some of our viewers?
Yeah, so there's, I know, hopefully you didn't leave here thinking that prescribed fire is too intimidating. Hopefully you have a healthy respect for fire and its use, but maybe you think it's something that's right for your property, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. And hopefully you don't think it's too intimidating. So I think there's a lot of good resources if you're really interested in getting more experience, getting training. I think there's a resource through eextension.org that's basically a fire course. The Indiana DNR does different training courses. You can reach out to your district wildlife biologist, and they may have some upcoming training courses and we may actually get out on a live prescribed fire. There's an online course, or basically an interactive course called eFire through North Carolina State University that walks through a lot of the stuff we talked about. Through Purdue Extension, we do what we call Learn and Burns for landowners, where we talk about the safety and the application of fire and why we would want to use it from a land owner's standpoint, things like wildlife and forest reasons. And then we actually go out, weather permitting, on a burn and show you how it's done and that kind of stuff. So those are good ways to kind of dip your toes in the water of prescribed fire. And again, through the Indiana Prescribed Fire Council, if you're not interested in lighting your own fire on your property, and that's certainly 100% okay if you don't feel like you have the training and experience, but you think it's right for your property, there's a list of consultants on there that offers prescribed fire as a service for your property.
I would add a couple things. One, if you know somebody that's going to burn on their property and you've never done it before, ask to help so that you can go out there and actually experience it. That's the best way you're going to learn, is just watch some fires and be on some fires. Another avenue to look to kind of volunteer to help. Some of our land trusts will do burns, and sometimes they will need individuals to help them run fire or watch the line. They're not going to give you the drip torch necessarily to start the fire, but they're going to need eyes on that line to make sure that the fire doesn't go over their fire break and burn somewhere they don't want to go. And they're always looking for help and volunteers for that type of activities.
I know I learned a lot today about prescribed fire. And again, if you don't feel comfortable doing it, there are plenty of professionals that will help you. And if you do plan to do prescribed fire on your own, make sure you have the proper training so that the fire department doesn't end up at your property and your neighbors don't hate you. Anything else you guys want to say before we go? No, we covered everything.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And if you have any questions about prescribed fire, Jared and Mike always have their email boxes open, and you can shoot them something. And Mike, I just want to give a shout out to your research as well. I know we talked a lot about just in general, but you do a lot of research on prescribed fire and the effects on oak and hickory forests with our hardwood ecosystem experiment. So anybody you want to mention there? I know I posted the article with Sky Greenler, one of your former grad students, and her research with the acorns and things like that. Anything else you want to mention that you've seen in your research?
Just that I think my opinion is that the benefits of prescribed fire, or the use of fire in our forests, far outweigh the risk. If it's done properly, fire can actually be economically advantageous in terms of regenerating our oak forest. We're still trying to gather all the data to confirm that, but everything that we see thus far really suggests that this fear of fire, prescribed fire, is unfounded, and we'll get more in terms of if we can bring more fire back into our woods.
Anything from a field perspective, Jared?
Say that again, sorry.
Any final comments from a field and wildlife perspective?
Same kind of piggyback on Mike's comments. There's lots of benefits from a wildlife standpoint from using fire, from maintaining certain ecosystems that certain wildlife species may favor, to plant composition and food resources, all that kind of stuff. And just kind of echo what Wendy said, is the number one priority when it comes to prescribed fire is safety. So we're always going to be as safe as we possibly can to take out some of those factors that may lead to an escape fire. So safety is number one. Always remember that, and have that in the back of your mind.
Thanks so much, Jared and Mike. I hope everyone learned as much as I did about prescribed fire. And check out Jared's videos on our Facebook page. Go to our videos, Wildlife Habitat Hints, and he's got 5 different techniques you can look at as far as how to actually perform prescribed fire. So that's it for us today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks after the holiday season for more FNR Ask the Experts. We'll see you then. Happy holidays.